People of Reddit, what did you laugh at, only to realize it wasn't a joke? I have a slight hearing problem, which has led to several awkward faux pas situations. The worst one was when I was a cashier at Walgreens. A woman came up to pay and I asked how she was doing and she replied with a sigh and "oh, I just found out." I couldn't hear the second part, so I asked her to repeat. I still couldn't hear the second part and I didn't want to make her keep repeating, but her delivery sounded like a dry joke, so I just politely laughed. She gave me the dirtiest look and said, "What's so funny about my husband having cancer?" I definitely heard her that time. At college orientation, my group was told that we were going to see an improv show later in the day. When we got there, it was one of those acting troupes that does shows about alcohol poisoning and assault and stuff like that. We all kind of tried to politely laugh through the show because we felt bad that it wasn't funny, or even well done, and we were under the pretense that it was comedy. We totally got yelled at. 2 years ago today, I was getting the kids ready to go to a local water park. My husband was taking out the trash. His phone rang. I answered. His mom, who was supposed to be meeting us at the water park, said she needed to talk to my husband immediately. He walked in the door at that moment. I handed him the phone. A minute goes by and he says, "I'll be right there," and drops his phone on the table. He looked at the ceiling and said, "My sister is dead." I was thinking he meant like, she got in trouble in the "OMG my parents are going to kill me" type way, since he said it so calmly. So I grinned at him and said, "What did she do?" Then he said she overdosed. Please keep in mind, I was, like, 11. Back when I lived in a foster group home, me and some of the older guys were playing on the Xbox. One of my foster brothers stopped and started making funny faces at me. He was a chill guy and we got along well and joked together, so I laughed and made faces back. He was having a seizure. I had a friend that had seizures frequently. A group of us were leaving a restaurant and he made a mean ass face, stuck his arms out, and pointed at the car in front of us. Another friend said, "Man, he really hates that freaking car." Yep, seizure. Your dad just cut his finger off with a push mower. Monday morning, guy comes up to my desk, says my car is on fire. I respond laughing and saying okay. Guy say, "No, I am serious. Look out office window, 10-foot flames shooting out of the hood of my car." A girl writhing around on the ground at a festival. I thought it was performance art. She was actually having a really bad acid trip and paramedics were rushing over. The looks from her friends as I lamely tried to explain myself will haunt my dreams. One time my dog had a seizure and fell into a laundry basket and it looked like he was dancing. It was pretty funny. My sir was mortified. One time I walked into my school and I looked at my friend who was very upset and said, "What happened? Your cat died." It's an Italian saying. And he said, "No, my mom did." I laughed for a while because he was one to make those type of jokes. Little did I know. One of my best friends, a twin, in college told me she was pregnant. She had played jokes on me before, so I laughed and said, "No freaking way, you're the smart one." I didn't believe my wife was pregnant for like 2 weeks before I realized it wasn't a joke. I was sitting in the doctor's office thinking, dang, she's sure taking this thing pretty far. I was chatting with an elderly security guard at the movies and he was talking about having a degree he never used. He said, "Now, I only use it to decorate my bedroom wall." I laughed and he said, "You laugh now." I laugh about it sometimes, but I cry most of the time. I was pretty ignorant in high school, and our friend group was one that would bust each other all the time without many boundaries. A friend was telling us about how his father died of breast cancer at the lunch table. I thought he was messing with me, so I kept laughing, telling him to quit his BS. Me being a freaking dumb teenager assumed only women could get breast cancer, and just rolled my eyes when he kept saying it was true. This proceeded for the entire lunch period. It wasn't until after lunch period was over and someone else came up to me and confirmed the fact that I realized what a gigantic butthole I had just been. Years ago, a co-worker told me never to drink water from a pond with a beaver dam because I could get beaver fever. I laughed. He informed me that it's a real thing and his dad died of it. I felt so bad. In all fairness, it's called beaver fever. Good morning, Mom. We've just arrested your husband for statutory R. Did you know your husband was having an affair with one of his female students? Yeah, it wasn't a joke. To be fair, I wouldn't expect cops to go around pranking people by telling them they're so are someone. A friend's grandmother died. When I asked how she died, she said she choked on a piece of banana. Back in high school during lunch, I sat at a table with this kid that just couldn't eat his food without looking like he was passing over a kidney stone. I laughed and asked him to relax and slow down because it wasn't a race. One of the kids at the table told me he had to rate his and those were his tics. Felt like crap and immediately apologized. When I was in high school, I worked at a video store. One night when I wasn't on shift, I went in to rent a movie. As soon as I entered, the manager dragged me outside and demanded to know if I'd left a bottle of pee in the office. He was the kind of guy who'd say do thing to screw with people, so I started laughing. Fortunately, he didn't take that as a sign of guilt, and pointed out that if he'd been screwing around, he would have asked in front of everyone. I quickly stopped laughing. Turned out it was another employee's way of giving notice. This happened to me a few days ago. I received a private Facebook message of what I can only call word soup. It was seemingly random, but just barely cohesive enough to make sense at times. Like really riding that uncanny valley. I assumed it was some sort of bot that used Markov chains from scraping posts on my friends list because it had references to things, places and people I knew and even posted photos from people's albums. So, I screenshotted it and posted it because it was legitimately hilarious. I mean, it had such winners as if you're her love you have to prove all others are inferior to you in bed with Jill. I was like, hey everyone, check out the weird ramblings of this bot. An hour or so later, I got a message from another friend that explained that this was actually an old mutual friend from high school who had suffered a psychotic break and was schizophrenic. Sometimes he goes off his meds, or his family doesn't keep an eye on him and he makes tons of Facebook accounts and messages this crap to people. They'd been getting them for years, and I must have fallen into his crushes. Suddenly it wasn't so funny anymore and was rather tragic. I deleted the post and continued to block the next 6-7 aliases that kept sending stuff like that all night. Went from hilarious, to sad, to alarming in the span of a few hours. One of my most uptight friends is a Reiki healer. When she first told me, I burst into a fit of laughter. I thought she was making fun of herself. She was serious. I was a preteen at Bible camp and one of the leaders was sharing the story of his upbringing. It got real intense and he ended that intense part of the story with "and now my brother is an alcoholic." His tone and the timing was rather comedic and I thought he was doing that to break some tension, and without thinking anything else of it, I let out a huge, organic HA. Everyone turned to look at me. I tried to fake a coughing fit to play it off. Don't think it was very convincing. My cousin dated a girl named Fear. I laughed and she got pee. Whoops. You laughed in the face of fear. I once introduced myself to a gentleman who said my name is X, or you can call me Grey Wolf, and I kinda chuckle snorted but then kinda instantly realized, oh, you're part native aren't you? My brother got his face blown off by a shotgun, she said. For some reason, my brain immediately short-circuited and I thought of a Bugs Bunny cartoon, Daffy Duck getting shot in the face, his duck bill landing some few feet away. I laughed. The girl looked at me in horror. I tried to explain. I failed. Your sister is 10 weeks pregnant. Going to middle school and needing to make a phone call home before I had a cell phone from the office. The secretary said, "It'll cost you 50 cents. I laughed. She didn't. That was the moment I realized that despite being a good kid, adults suddenly wouldn't like or trust me simply because I was in middle school. It was jarring. The guy who worked receiving at my old job came up to me one day and said, "Your car's been crushed." I laughed. He insisted that I go outside and look. A trucker had knocked down the I-beam which holds up the gate I was parked right next to. It just barely scratched my bumper and headlight cover. I filed a claim and pocketed about $500. Props to that guy for preparing me for the worst. A young lady in the choir who had beautiful dark hair, lustrous, long Italian, arrived at rehearsal as a blonde. Thanks to this really fake looking wig she had on over her natural hair. It screamed fake wig and looked like she was trying to be funny, just to bring a little light humor to rehearsal. One of the tenors asked, "Did you get that wig from Sears?" She said, "Actually, yes," at which point everyone laughed. Turns out it was really true. She did get the wig from Sears, and she thought it looked great, whereas everyone else thought it looked so unnatural and wrong on her. I was at a pirate-themed costume party and a woman was dressed as the coin from the first Pirates of the Caribbean. The costume was pretty big, you could only see her head and legs, so I shouted across the room, "Hey, it looks like you have no arms," to which she replied that she didn't. I laughed it off thinking she was joking. Nope, she literally had no arms. I've never been more mortified in my life. Last year when a couple of veterinary students, myself included, were having lunch, I lose track of a conversation while on my phone and only heard the back end where a friend started listing symptoms. Jokingly, I suggested they test the dog for Addison's disease. She was talking about her mom's chemo side effects. I've had people laugh when I say my dad is a C-kid and say, "Oh yeah, my dad is like that too," and then I have to explain that my dad is literally addicted to crack and steals money from my family. Ex-wife and I had been fighting for many months. I'd been sleeping on the couch, but I was staying there for the sake of the kids. One day she came home and she sits me down at the kitchen table and tells me the bad news. "You have to move out. I have a boyfriend now, and he's kind of jealous. He doesn't like the idea of you living here with me." I actually burst out laughing at the irony. Wasn't laughing too hard, though, when I had to pack up my things and kiss my kids goodbye. They saw my bags by the door and said, "When are you coming back, Daddy?" They were legit terrified they would never see me again. All I could say was, "I'll see you soon." At that point I didn't even know where I was going to live. Choose your partner wisely. Take all the time in the world to get to know them. Avoid this experience if you can. My brother's girlfriend, when she realized that Cubans came from Cuba, and Haitians come from Haiti and so on and so forth. When I first met my best friend at uni, she showed me a picture of her brother. I laughed really hard at the picture and said, "Why is he pulling such a silly face? He's got Down syndrome." Cringe. Okay, so I was at my best friend's high school grad party at his house, and he invited some of his other friends not from our school to come too. I always goofed around in high school and today felt like any other day. This kid, who was nicknamed Beaters, and I were getting along fine when I noticed some type of string hanging from his waist belt. I couldn't really make out what it was, so I assumed it was a tag to his clothes or something similar. Being an immature, unaware high schooler, I thought nothing of the context of where we were, or thinking anything would be inappropriate for me to crack a remark or joke. I took his string and started tugging on it and even asked, "LOL, what is this? Your stupid inflatable pants?" He looked down and didn't give the reaction I was hoping, and he turned and said, "No, jackass. It's actually my insulin pump," which is where I found out his name wasn't Beaties, it was Beats. You know, short for diabetes. OHH man, I am still super ashamed of this. Back in 8th grade, 12-13 yo, the school took the class to a science fair for kids with all sorts of awesome stuff. Roughly 2 hours in, we were in the middle of a chemistry presentation where a lively old man poured different chemicals into flasks and it would ignite, expand, etc. After a few experiments, he stopped and threw the greatest hype speech my 12-year mind ever heard about the world's greatest scientist alive. Since the whole show and speech really captivated me, I stood at the edge of my seat awaiting the reveal. Then the next slide was projected on the wall, and there it was, the funniest picture my 12-year self ever saw. Thinking it was a joke, I bursted out in laughter. Then I realized that nobody else did. The professor looked at me in disbelief. Even my classmates' stares felt disturbed. After 3 seconds of silence that felt more like 3 hours, I stood up and walked out of the room. And that's how I first learnt about Stephen Hawking. I was chatting with a future Tinder date and he was an actor. I asked him how he got into it. I broke my leg while being the quarterback in high school and tried out for the musical and got the leading role. How nice. What really happened? That's what really happened. I don't think I've ever met someone who had quite as wholesome of a life as he did. I used to have lunch with this guy I worked with. We became really good friends. All of a sudden he stopped coming to my office. I asked him why and he told me it was because I think you have a crush on me and you make me very uncomfortable. I am also a guy who is 12 years younger than him. He is very ugly and has cerebral palsy. I laughed, then I realized he was serious. He has an extremely jealous wife who put all these weird thoughts in his head. As soon as I realized he wasn't joking, I said, "Do you realize how ugly you are?" I was in shock and it just came out. I felt really bad. While watching Snow White and the Huntsman in the theater, there is a scene where a magical deer or unicorn or something like that shows up and stands there all majestic like, then gets shot with an arrow and keels over. I burst out laughing and my sisters looked at me in disgust. A girl that wanted to become our new flatmate, when asked what her hobbies were, "I enjoy sleeping." I laughed. She didn't. You can't wear ponchos on campus anymore because we've decided it could possibly be offensive to someone at a student union meeting. It was the pause before someone. The entire lecture theater took it as a funny joke about political correctness. She was deadly serious. A guy said that anyone who takes any kind of drug should be killed by the government. I laughed and he said, "No, seriously, it would solve the problem." I was taking a cave tour in West Virginia and at one point the tour guide said scientists believe that these markings on the rocks were made by erosion from rainfall over time. But we know that it was actually created by the waters from Noah's flood. I laughed unpleasantly and involuntarily, and the guide glared at me for the rest of the trip. My ex's brother's ex-girlfriend, everything that came out of her mouth was serious. I laughed every time. Looks at CD case made in Mexico, but they're a third world country. How do they have CD technology? Ex's brother to me while the four of us were at the fair. They split off from us but he came back first. So she said, "You're very mature for your age." I laughed. I was older than her. She didn't know this. He continued. When I explained you were actually older, she went quiet. I don't know where she is. She came back after a palm reading thinking she got an age increase. I laughed again and she was dead serious. Aren't ants just baby wasps? I mean, they look similar. No, Hawaii is in Cuba. It's not in the US. Cats are always female and dogs are always male because they're the same animal. Sexual dimorphism. She learned that phrase and used it for 3 weeks straight. Horses have teeth. At an eating disorder clinic in the weekly meeting, the staff told us that the neighbors had complained that their cats were vomiting. They thought we were feeding them or something. I was snickering because it sounded to me like they thought we were contagious. When a girl told me she accidentally used the wrong spell, witchcraft, and killed a cow. We just got a call that the church messed up and the wedding isn't at 11 AM anymore. 2 days before my sister-in-law's wedding, I started hysterical laughing. Can you imagine? I didn't need to imagine because the family was living it. I was shadowing at a high school and one of my stops was a Latin class. The teacher introduced himself but I couldn't understand him, so I laughed and said I couldn't speak Latin. He actually just had a surprisingly thick British accent. SHHH. Like this video, but quietly so you don't wake up the sleeping papa. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.